you spoke at the RNC.
I did.
And I watched the speech again this morning, and you mentioned the deep state.
Yeah.
What is the deep state, based on what you know?
Yeah. There's a whole chapter on this in the book. The title of that chapter may sound boring. It's the most important chapter in this book. The title of the chapter is, There Are Three Branches of Government, Not Four. Okay? So the legislative branch is the branch that makes the laws. They write the laws in Congress. The executive branch is the branch that enforces the laws. That includes the president, includes prosecutors and police. The judicial branch is the branch that interprets the laws. And the way the United States of America is supposed to work is that those judges, the executives, the presidents, the police, the people who make the laws, they're separate. It's what we call separation of powers, and they check and balance one another. That's how we learned it in school, at least. Turns out that's not how it works. The branch of government that wields the most power is none of those three. It's the fourth branch of government of unelected bureaucrats who are the ones who make the rules, they enforce the rules, and they even have their in-house judges that interpret the rules that are harming this country in pervasive ways. They're three-letter agencies: FTC, SCC, FDA, EPA, TSA, God knows what. It's an alphabet soup of 4 million plus federal bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., and then there's millions more at the state level, too, who were never elected to their positions, but are effectively writing laws that have the full effect of the force of law, but they call them rules or regulations. That's the deep state. The deep state is the people who we never elected to run the government, who are the ones who are actually running the government. And I think one of the ways we've got to save our country is that we make sure, once again, the people we elect to run the government are the ones who actually run the government. And I don't think that should be controversial. It's one of the things I ran on for my campaign for U.S. president. It's one of the cases I make in this book. How do you fix that? Mass firings in the federal bureaucracy. Go fire 75% of the people. End some of these agencies that should not exist. Just shut them down. Devolve power back to the states and to the people. Rescind a lot of these regulations which never went through Congress in the first place. And that's the difference between living in a democracy and living in a monarchy. See, in England, in old world England, I should say, right? Pre-revolutionary England, they didn't have laws. They used to have edicts. You call something an edict where the person who makes a law, so what's an edict? Let's say I write something with the stroke of a pen and say that binds you from doing certain things. You have to behave in a certain way based on what I write with the stroke of a pen. In a democracy, you get to vote me out of power. In a monarchy or a technocracy, I get to write that as an edict and you have no say over the person who actually binds you. Well, in the United States of America, the whole premise was if somebody's making rules that bind you, that change the way you can live your life, then what you get in return is you get to fire them if you don't like what they actually do. Most of the people who write the rules that determine what you can and can't do in your life, you can't fire them. You can't vote them out of office. And it's one step worse than that. Not only can't you vote them out of office, even the people you vote into office, all the way up to a U.S. president, can't actually fire them. That's insane by American standards, by our founding fathers' standards. Yet that is exactly how it works in the U.S. federal government today, where you have these so-called civil servants, the bureaucrats, who historically have not even been able to be fired up to and including by a U.S. president who's democratically elected. I'm sorry, that's not a democracy. That is a new kind of monarchy. And that's the way it works in the United States today. And I am on a mission to change that. It's probably the most important issue that I care about. It's the most important chapter in this book. But one of the things I found, both in running my presidential campaign and even for talking to the publisher and others for this book, is they say that's boring. Right? People don't want to hear about the administrative state. Sounds like a boring word, like an academic word. And so what I try to do in this chapter of the book is to make that actually come to life with real world examples of how people have been harmed. And I hope people have a chance to arm themselves with that knowledge. And it's the kind of thing where once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's not a particularly partisan point. And you've had people who have leaned right in the past that have abused the levers of bureaucratic power, just as you have had, I think it's happened even more often with people on the left doing it. But whether you're on the left or the right, even if you and I disagree like hell on a bunch of issues, we should at least want to live in a country in the United States where the people we elect to run the government are the ones who actually run it, not the shadow government or what you'd call the deep state that's pulling the strings today.
Well, based on your definition, would you say that the Supreme Court is the deep state?
I would not, and here's why.
Well, let me stop you for a second.
Yeah.
They're not elected by the people.
Right.
And
they interpret the laws, though.
And they have no term limits. They are there until they die. And you've seen this happen time and time again. So why would the Supreme Court not be the deep state? And do you support term limits on the Supreme Court?
So I don't support term limits on the Supreme Court because they're interpreting the law, and you want them. In the Constitution, it was written since day one that was a check and balance on the way the executive and the legislative branch work. That was designed to be a check on executive power and to be a check on Congress overreach. If you want to override the Supreme Court, here's how you do it. You pass a new law by people who you can elect to Congress. So that's the beauty of the system. If the Supreme Court interprets a law in a certain way, Congress can override them by just passing a new law. And who's Congress comprised of? It's comprised by the people who you and I get to elect. That's the beauty of our system. But what I have a problem with is when you have this unelected bureaucracy, where historically the thing they say is you can't even fire those bureaucrats. One of the things actually Donald Trump has taken a lot of criticism for from even the Harris camp in this campaign is that he wants to go fire those federal bureaucrats. They say you can't do that. Well, the irony is if the people we elect can't fire the people who are making the rules, then actually they're more like kings than they are democratically elected representatives. So that's where my issue is. It's a great counter-argument, but I think that if you think about people who are interpreting the rules, if you don't like the way the Supreme Court's interpreted a law, then just you get to pass a new law through the people you elect. That's checks and balances. By the way, the U.S. president directly appoints each of those 9 justices with only the advice and consent of the U.S. Senate, who's also elected. In contrast to the 4 million people in the federal bureaucracy who nobody elected, weren't directly appointed by the president, weren't confirmed by the Senate, and most importantly, can't be fired by either the Senate, the Congress, or the U.S. presidency. That's the absence of accountability as we know it. That's what I'm against, and it's a great way to get to some of those distinctions we don't otherwise get to talk about.
Well, you live in Ohio.
That's right. I was born and raised here, too.
Right. Do you have any pets?
I don't.
Okay, so you're not worried about Haitians eating.
I take that back. Actually, my wife would take offense to that. We got like some fish. We got some slugs. We got some.
Yeah. Well, according to Trump,
we got a little aquarium upstairs.
Right,
yeah.
But according to Trump, the fish and the slugs are safe from the Haitians. They're only interested in cats and dogs.
I went to Springfield, right? And I spent a lot of time in Springfield growing up. You know, it's not some sort of just like, I just went there when this happened. I spent tons of time there growing up. I used to eat a tumbleweed off the highway, although that's since closed. There's a sub place called Mike and Rosie's. I've probably eaten there more times than most people who live in Springfield even today. There's a mall we used to go to. That one's now closed. I got family who live there. It's a near and dear place to my heart from my upbringing. I played tennis there every summer growing up at Wittenberg University. It's about 50 minutes from where I live right now. So I went there last week. I just posted on social media that we're coming. It's amazing. Hundreds of people showed up. It ended up being over 375 people show up there. Hundreds more waiting outside. 2,000 people wanted to come. People want to be heard, okay? Did I hear about cats and dogs? No. But what I did hear about was a woman, and I have no reason to doubt her. I don't think a mother makes this kind of story up about her daughter. Said that her daughter, and this is live streamed at the time, right? I didn't know what to expect from this event. She takes the mic, she tells a story of her daughter being chased by a man with a machete out of a supermarket. She called the police and for 2 hours didn't get a real response, and they didn't even follow through with the investigation. So I think people are upset and they want to be heard. And I think that's fair game. I also met with Haitian migrants. And I think that having gone to the community, I don't want to just hear some biased perspectives from any angle. I met with city officials and I spent an hour with several Haitian community leaders. We actually built, a really powerful bond, and we had some open dialogue that I think brought us together. Here's what I'll say. And this actually relates to one of the chapters of the book anyway, so we might as well talk about it. An open border is not a border. There are 20,000 Haitian migrants that were effectively dumped into a place like Springfield that was not prepared to absorb them in a town of 58,000 people, okay? That would be the equivalent of just saying 2 million people just showed up to New York City, which is where you are right now and where I was earlier this week. It's not anybody's fault. I don't blame any of the Haitians who showed up there. If we were in their position, we'd be doing the same thing. In fact, several of them had compelling stories. One of them was a man who was a doctor. I had a great conversation with him. He'd gone to medical school. He'd been through school for 8 years, just like you would, undergrad and then med school. He was a doctor, successful doctor, taking care of people in Haiti. And then these gangs repeatedly pester him, and not just pester him. When I say pester, it's not like they're calling him mean names. They kidnap him. They ask for ransom before he's able to get out and go back and live his life. And that becomes such a repeated threat that his only way out is leaving the country. He comes to this country. He's now in Springfield. He's a smart doctor. He has great knowledge. He would pass the USMLE. That's the test you have to take to get medical certification to practice as a doctor, except they don't let him take the test in this country because they don't recognize Haitian medical schools. So he ends up going to nursing school, puts himself, pays out of pocket, working another side job to pay and go through nursing school to become a nurse at a time where we're short on primary care. That's a compelling American story right there, right? But that's also not necessarily representative of every migrant story, most of whom do depend on Medicaid and the welfare state at a time when welfare and Medicaid themselves are strained, not just in Springfield, but across the country. So my view is this, okay? First, we need to put an end to the illegal immigration, use our military on the southern border, put aquatic barriers in the Rio Grande, use technology to do it, deport people who enter this country illegally, reinstate remain in Mexico. If your case is being adjudicated and your claim is that you're seeking asylum, you got to have proof of it to get in this country. We shouldn't fund sanctuary cities with taxpayer dollars. That's fixing the illegal immigration crisis. And then as it relates to legal immigration, is there a good level of, can there be a good level of legal immigration? Of course. Are there legal immigrants who can make America a better country? Yes. I would know. I mean, I'm the kid of legal immigrants to this country who came here with no money, and I've gone on to found multi-billion-dollar companies. That's America. But if you're going to be an immigrant to this country and you're going to be reliant on the welfare state and you don't speak the language and you don't know the first thing about the civic ideals of the United States, then I don't think you should be allowed into the country through the legal immigration system either. And I don't mean that as a xenophobic or racist, none of that. It's what it means to actually say the citizens of this country get to determine what immigration policies best advance their own interests. So if you think about it like your body as an analogy, you think about your nation as a body, here's how I would frame the principles. So I'll give you the principles and then you tell me if you disagree. 3 principles for immigration policy. Using the analogy of a body, a nation as a body. No migration without consent. Consent should only be granted to migrants who benefit America, and those who enter without consent must be removed. I think those are pretty basic principles. And, we could talk about mass deportations, we could talk about building the wall, but when it boil it down, no migration without consent. Consent should only be granted to migrants who benefit America, and those who enter without consent must be removed. I think that's pretty reasonable. I think most Americans actually probably agree on that. And if we use that as our North Star and stick to that as principle, then I think our country is going to be stronger for it. And that's what I'm aiming to do, certainly with this chapter in the book, but even more importantly, with how we use that chapter in the book to translate that into real principled policy action in our country.